Hello everyone, welcome to Undisputed with Clay and Brenton, where pretty much everything we say can be disputed. And in this episode we just might, because in this episode we have some fun things planned for you guys. We took a little bit of time before the show to come up with some of our answers, so I'll let Clay explain what's going on. Clay, what have we got?
Okay, so over the last 10 years, name the driver that you think has risen the most. That's going to be my first 4 questions for you tonight. Who do you think has risen the most in NASCAR?
Alright, so first of 4 questions on the evening. Risen the most. As controversial as this might be, I think Joey Logano has risen the most. From being called sliced bread by Mark Martin in his rookie season, doing pretty terrible for that first year, second year, having to change teams like 4 years in or something like that. I will be honest, I'm surprised Gibbs hung on to him that long, but it kind of shows the effort that he had, or that Gibbs has, and patience for a driver. But to go from that and waiting 10 years almost to get your first championship, which seems like, it's a championship, that's a lot, but in essence, he made it. He won by the rules. Again, it is how it is. Its history has been written. But to go in 10 years from the greatest thing since sliced bread / failure to winning a championship, that's a pretty hefty accomplishment for the 10-year period that we have.
Indeed. Well, I think for me, I'm going to give you my answer. I think Martin Truex is the obvious answer, and he was my first choice. But after doing a little more research, I actually changed my mind. I do not think Martin Truex Jr. is the one that's risen the most over the last 10 years. Honestly, I think Kevin Harvick has made the biggest improvement.
Nice.
In the last 10 years. Pulling up some line here. In 2008, Kevin Harvick had an average finish of 17.6 position. So basically,
wow.
In 2018, he had an average finish of 8.8. So he had an average. So if that isn't some improvement, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
It went from, struggling to put a good race together every week to, winning the championship in 14 and pretty much being in the contention or in
every
contention for the last 4 years. So for question number 1, Kevin Harvick has risen the most.
That is a well-supported answer. I think that's well done. Absolutely. I can completely agree with that.
Number 2.
Okay.
Who has fallen the worst in the last 10 years?
Okay, so my pick for this one, I didn't do a lot of Google searching, but I was more primarily thinking in my head of who has been somebody who I thought, when I went off to college, I was able to watch NASCAR a whole lot more because they had cable where I moved to. And so looking back on those times, thinking from this point how much the sport has changed, I picked Matt Kenseth. From the standpoint that he is sort of still racing. He was able to get a ride for this year a couple times. But to go from one of the best teams in NASCAR to being let go from that team and moving to another really good team, not being able to perform with that team and pretty much just being dropped. Like, they literally just didn't say what he was doing and he's just gone, to kind of barely getting a ride. And Matt was somebody who was championship contention for many years in a row. And I mean, from this, I took it from the standpoint of if you look at a racer who's still been racing, who's still trying to race, who's actually had some really good success, to see where he is now, within a 10-year span, he was my pick, is Matt Kenseth.
Gotcha. That's a solid pick. But yeah, with the exception of 2013, where he won all those races, Matt's career has been pretty up and down.
Yeah, and that was what the hard part was, is why I picked him, is because when I looked at the question, I just have how I interpreted it was, since he is still in the sport, like he actually still raced this year, it still gives him a fighting chance. I didn't really want to quite pick somebody who hasn't been in the sport, because I kind of saved one of those for later. But more just the fact of, because he's still fighting to keep a ride. He's not somebody who's had a level, like, okay, mediocre career the whole time. He's actually been pretty good. Then he's also pretty sucked. So that's why I picked him.
Unfortunately, if anything, this past year did nothing but hurt his record, not help it.
Oh yeah, exactly. It
just adds to him, or it just adds to your theory there. For me, who I think has fallen the most over the last 10 years, and this one hurts because he was my favorite driver, but Casey Kane.
Oh,
what happened
yeah.
to Casey? What happened to Casey? I know this was longer than 10 years ago, but in 2006, Casey won 6 races in that season. And every season from there on out, with the exception of 2007, Casey won 1 to 2 races every year, most of the time 2 or more. In 2008 and in 2010, he may have only won 2 points races, but in 2008, I believe he won the All-Star race. And in 2010, he also won one of the Gatorade Dual races.
Yeah.
At Daytona. So, he didn't always win all the points or a lot of the point races, but he was in victory. He found himself in victory lane a lot and was always a factor every year. But when looking at his average finish from 2008 compared to 2018, Casey would come in around 15th for an average finish.
Oh, wow.
2018, he was 23rd for an average finish.
Wow.
Pretty big slip, especially when you're dealing with averages.
Yeah.
There's
Absolutely.
There's some 20s and 30s in there, quite a few, to get that average down that low. So, I think an obvious choice would have been Jimmy Johnson based on this year, but I think 2018 was just a slump for Jimmy.
Yeah.
When you look at the numbers for Jimmy, in 2014, Jimmy won 4 races and had an average finish of 15th.
Wow.
This year, he obviously didn't win any races, but he still had an average finish of 16th. So, is Jimmy in a little bit of a slump? Yes, but does that mean that he's gonna completely fall apart and be done from here on out? I don't think so.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Jimmy is kind of like what do you say, NASCAR's version of Tom Brady. Just when you think he's getting old and no good, comes right back and shows you how it's done.
Yep. I completely agree with that one.
So moving on to question number 3, Brenton, who do you think is the next to retire? Who's going to be the next Dale Earnhardt Jr.?
Okay, so I had to look at this one a little bit from the perspective of who is in the age range capable, and when I looked at the question, I took it from the interpretation of who, not only who is at the age, but who would be somebody who, if they retire, would actually kind of like the sport would kind of take notice versus like, so like, I'm not gonna say like I picked this guy, but somebody who did come to mind in my picking process was Ryan Newman. But I don't think he would be somebody right now who would be an effect in the sport. Like people would really kind of take notice and be like, "Oh my goodness, Ryan Newman's retiring." when I went through the rest of the drivers, you have Jimmy Johnson, you have Kevin Harvick, you've got Kurt Busch, a lot of Denny Hamlin, I guess, would even kind of almost hit that ballpark.
Mm.
You've got quite a few handful of guys that kind of um, that are up there, and the one that actually came to mind that I picked is Clint Bowyer. I chose Clint Bowyer. The only reason I picked him is because he is in that age range. He has had a good run in the sport. He would actually have an effect if he was to retire, because Stuart Haas has been so good over the last 2 years that he's in that equipment. That's kind of something that NASCAR would take notice of. And kind of like the third reason I did was because of the equipment, because of his age. I feel like if he doesn't perform this year, that they might just kind of say, well, they might do a Kurt Busch and be like, we're not going to really renew your contract. He might not want to go to another team and just say, I'm done. So that's who I picked for next to retire, and I could see him actually probably staying retired. I don't really see him once he's done. I think he'd be done.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to disagree with you on that one.
That's fine.
I think that Clint is doing too good to retire right now. I mean, Clint was in a nasty slump there for a couple years with Michael Waltrip Racing, and he's finally found some momentum again. I think he's been reborn. I don't see him going anywhere for a while. Um, Honestly, who I think, and I mean, Ryan Newman has a ride now for 2019. I think he's going to stick around for at least another season or two. A free agent that I see out there that is probably in trouble of maybe even being forced to retire. And my pick for the next to retire is Jamie McMurray.
Oh, nice.
Jamie's been kicked out of the one car,
Yep.
and I haven't heard anything about anybody picking him up. Jamie has been fair at best in the sport, but he's a pretty stable, figure in the sport.
Sure. Yep.
Going all the way back to 2003 when he filled in for Sterling Marlin after he broke his neck and winning that race at Charlotte. So Jamie's been around for a while. I think he's a little older than a lot of people realize, and due to his recent lack of success and right now his lack of interest in car owners, I see Jamie McMurray being the next to head out the door.
Very nice. I actually didn't even think about that. I forgot that he was on the table. This is what happens when I'm trying to just go from memory. And I'm not looking up. That's a good one. Yeah. So. Whew.
All right. Well, last but not least, who is the next driver to come out of retirement? We had Jeff Gordon come out of retirement for Dale Earnhardt Jr. We also had Dale Earnhardt Jr. come out of retirement this year to run an Xfinity race. Who do you think is the next driver to come out of retirement and run a national series race?
Okay. So I had to think about this one a little bit. It was hard to think of who is still viable to drive the cars, who actually retired, and I actually don't know if my pick actually retired. But my hilarious response, my gut response was, and what I started laughing about was, I picked Greg Biffle. I knew you would laugh at that. I knew it. Okay.
What's he even doing these days?
I don't know, right? I don't know. So that was my gut response. But then when you described a little bit more of the question, I was like, okay, this is not realistic. I don't even know what he's doing, so this is not a good pick. Let's rethink this pick. So I rethought the pick, and again, I don't know what constitutes retirement, because we've had people say they retire and then they're older or they just stop, whatever. But I picked, since somebody who was on the fence for a little while, somebody who can still get back in a car and probably still do well if given a good equipment, I
Mm-hmm.
picked Carl Edwards.
Mm-hmm.
He was the only one I could think of that is still in the age range to come back to a car, still could drive a car, doesn't have TV commitments, doesn't have any contractual mumbo jargon stopping him from doing it, that if needed, he could probably get in a car and still win a race because he just could. That was my pick, Carl Edwards.
It's not a bad pick, and I think a lot of people, myself included, would love to see that happen. But based on what I've heard out of Carl in recent interviews and stuff, I don't see him coming back quite yet. I don't think he's quite ready to get back in a car. Um, for me, who I think would be the next to come out of retirement for a maybe even just a publicity stunt at Daytona or Indy is going to be Danica Patrick.
Oh,
I don't think they know.
yeah.
It's kind of like a bad habit. She just shows up when you least expect her. Do I think she'll be successful? No, I don't. She'll be as non-successful or unsuccessful as she's always been.
Sure.
But I think GoDaddy or somebody is going to give her a ride for probably Daytona, and either in February or July, just to get her out there and get a woman out there for the year.
I could see that. I could see that. And that was actually, I looked up a list and real fast, and I was like, I I was going to pick her. She was in my top like five. I was like, I wouldn't be surprised to see her back. Um, to be honest, at this point, I'm actually wouldn't be surprised to see an F1 driver join the mix here at some point. Um, just simply of all those rumors that have been tossed around. So
It's possible. Honestly, who I think you're going to see make their way up pretty quick, and this is kind of, piggybacking off of my Danica theory. Danica isn't any good. I'm sorry, but she's just no good.
agreed.
They want more diversity in the sport, which is fine. But it doesn't change the fact that she's still an awful racer.
Right.
Honestly, I think the next woman that you're going to see make their way into the sport, I don't know if you know much about Haley Deegan.
Haley Deegan. Yep.
She's a K&N racer. She won her first race several weeks ago in the K&N series. I think you're going to see NASCAR start, putting a little emphasis on getting her in the mix, even if it's
Yeah.
just in X or maybe even Xfinity. But she's obviously good. She's proven herself, and I think there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of false assumptions out there that NASCAR fans only want to see men race and they only want to see white people race, things like that. It
Right.
has nothing to do with that.
Nope.
NASCAR fans want to see a good driver go out and race hard.
Yep.
Whether they're a man, whether they're a woman, whether they're white, African American, Asian, it doesn't matter. We don't care. I don't care. I know you
No, I
don't.
was like, I don't. Yeah, I don't care.
I want to see good racing. So if Haley has what it takes to get up there and leave those boys in the dust, I think it's great. And from what I've seen out of her so far in K&N, I'm very interested and kind of excited to see what she can do here in the near future.
I completely agree. It will be interesting. So I'm pretty excited about that as well because I've been reading articles and watching some of her clips, and she's got some promise in the sport.
Quite a
So
bit. Quite a bit.
oh
I've
yeah,
followed her a little bit. Not everybody, but a few people were starting to, liken her to Danica Patrick, and I'm like, if anything, that's an insult to Haley.
yeah, yeah,
That was much better.
yes. Because I mean, she's in this sport with non-open wheel cars. I mean, this is her thing. And I don't want this to sound terrible too. Hopefully, she won't be like another Kyle Larson. You'd hope she'd get into the sport and be able to perform and get
Right.
on a good team with some good equipment rather than a loyalty thing where like Larson, where he's with his team and he just won't leave, or I don't know what his deal is, but he could be
Right.
doing a lot better.
Well, and the thing with Kyle Larson is that he was a not maybe not successful, but he's had good, great success in the past with dirt racing. Kyle
Right.
Larson is a dirt racer. Dirt racing and NASCAR are two different things.
Yes.
Haley Deegan is showing that she can, you know, do well on asphalt in the K&N series, and those cars, while there is a night and day difference between them and a Monster Energy series stock car, the difference is not as great as going from maybe um, you know a winged sprint car to a stock car, or
Right.
like an Indy car to a stock car. The difference isn't as great, and I think that's going to pay off for her if and when she makes her way into the Monster Energy series.
Sure. Nope. I completely agree. Well, there you have it. Those are our picks. Those are our thoughts and opinions. We've disputed, we've undisputed, and we've had a lot of fun. So we really hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you did, let us know. We'd love to hear what your picks are. We'll put those in the description so you can, if you do, you can see them and you can read them and let us know. But thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.